She was a ghost in her own home, a widow locked away by the cruelty of a dead man's memory. For 3 years, Lady Aurelia Hammond had cried, her world shrinking to the 4 walls of her silent London townhouse. Society had forgotten her, or worse, pitied her as damaged. Tonight, she was forced back into the light, standing in the corner of a glittering ballroom, believing she was invisible. But then he arrived. Alistair Vane, the Duke of Ashworth, the most desired man in England, walked past every hopeful debutante, his eyes fixed on only one person. On her. The whispers stopped, the music seemed to fade, and in that moment a story of ruin was about to become a legend of redemption. The heavy velvet curtains in the morning room of No. 12 Grosvenor Square remained drawn, just as they had for the past 3 years. They were a deep, suffocating burgundy, the colour of dried blood, and they kept the world at bay. This was Lady Aurelia Hammond's sanctuary, and her prison. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light that dared to pierce the gloom, illuminating the cold, empty fireplace and the untouched tea service on the sideboard. Aurelia herself sat by the window, though she never looked out. She was a portrait sketched in charcoal, pale skin, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless tears, and a simple grey morning dress. At 26, she should have been in the prime of her life. Instead, she was the forgotten widow, the tragic figure society spoke of in hushed, pitying tones. Her late husband, Lord Julian Hammond, had been dead for 3 years, but his presence was more potent than any living being. Julian had been a man of savage charm and private cruelty. He had wooed her with poetry and promises, and then, once the ring was on her finger, he had begun the systematic dismantling of her spirit. "Your laugh is too loud, Aurelia," he would hiss at a dinner party, his fingers gripping her arm beneath the table until she bruised. "It sounds common. That dress is unsuitable. The colour makes you look sallow. Go and change. My friends are coming to dine. You will remain in your rooms. Your conversation is tedious." He had isolated her, cutting her off from her friends, her family, and finally, from herself. He ridiculed her love for painting, calling her efforts childish daubs. He dismissed her opinions until she simply stopped having them. By the time his carriage overturned on a rain-slicked road, Aurelia was already a ghost, hollowed out by his casual daily malice. His death had not freed her. It had simply changed the locks on her cage. Now she was bound by the rigid, performative grief demanded by society, a grief that had become all too real. She had cried for years, not just for the man who died, but for the woman who had died long before him. A sharp rap on the door startled her. The door opened without her permission. Only one person would dare. "Aurelia, you cannot be serious." Lady Eleanor Vale, her late husband's cousin, and the only person who had ever seen past Julian's facade, marched into the room. She was a whirlwind of vibrant energy, clad in a fashionable walking dress of emerald green. With a swift, decisive motion, she yanked open the curtains. Aurelia flinched, shielding her eyes, as the aggressive morning light flooded the room, revealing the thick layer of dust on the pianoforte. "Eleanor, please. My head." "Your head is fine. Your heart is what concerns me," Eleanor said, her voice firm but kind. She stood in front of Aurelia, hands on her hips. "You are 26 years old. You are beautiful, you are wealthy, and you are free, and you are hiding in this mausoleum." "It is expected," Aurelia whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "It has been 3 years," Eleanor countered, picking up a gilt-edged invitation from the silver tray on the table. It was embossed with a ducal crest. "The Duchess of Richmond's ball is tonight. It is the event of the season. And you," she declared, "are coming with me." Panic, cold and sharp, seized Aurelia. "No, I cannot. The crowds, the whispering, they all look at me. They all pity me. Or worse, they blame me." It was true. Julian had cultivated an image of a long-suffering husband tied to a difficult, melancholic wife. The Tun believed she was fragile, unstable. "Let them whisper," Eleanor said fiercely. "It is time you gave them something new to whisper about. Aurelia, look at me." She knelt before her friend, forcing Aurelia to meet her gaze. "The man who did this to you is gone. Do not let his ghost rule your life a day longer. You will come tonight. You will wear your mother's pearls, and you will hold your head high. This is not a request." Aurelia looked around the dusty room, at the heavy furniture that felt like it was pressing in on her. She felt the familiar sting of tears, the old comfortable ache of despair. But beneath it, a tiny, unfamiliar spark flickered. It was anger. "He took everything," Aurelia said, her voice trembling. "He took my joy, my art, my friends. He will not take my entire life." Eleanor smiled, a brilliant, relieved expression. "Good. That's the woman I remember. Now we are going to ring for your maid. We are going to send for a hairdresser. And tonight we are going to remind London that Lady Aurelia Hammond is not a tragedy." Hours later, Aurelia stood before the mirror in her bedroom, a place she had once dreaded. Her maid, Anne, had drawn a bath with rose oils. Her hair was styled in a soft, elegant chignon, revealing the graceful line of her neck. And the dress, it was not grey. It was not black. At Eleanor's insistence, it was a deep, midnight blue satin that shimmered in the candlelight. It was modest, with long lace sleeves, but the cut was exquisite. Her mother's pearls were cool against her skin. She looked, not like the girl she had been, but not the widow she had become. She looked like someone new. "I'm frightened, Eleanor," she admitted, her hands trembling as she smoothed the satin. Eleanor squeezed her shoulder, her reflection appearing beside Aurelia's. "Courage, my dear. It is not a battle. It is merely a party. And you are the most beautiful woman there." The ballroom at Richmond House was a sea of glittering jewels, powdered wigs, and vibrant silks. Hundreds of candles blazed in crystal chandeliers, casting a warm golden glow over the Tun in all their glory. The air hummed with music from the orchestra, the shuffle of dancing feet, and the incessant, high-pitched chatter of 100 conversations. For Aurelia, it was a sensory assault. She stood near a marble column with Eleanor, her gloved fingers clutching her fan so tightly her knuckles ached. Every laugh sounded like a jeer. Every curious glance felt like an accusation. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the intricate parquet of the floor, wishing she could disappear into it. "He's here," Eleanor murmured, her voice suddenly tight with excitement. "Who?" Aurelia asked, not looking up. "The Duke, Ashworth. He's just arrived." A palpable shift occurred in the room. The chatter dipped, then rose again with renewed vigor. Mothers subtly pushed their daughters forward. Fans fluttered with more purpose. Aurelia had heard of him, of course. Alistair Vane, the Duke of Ashworth. He was the great prize of the London season, immensely wealthy, devastatingly handsome, and notoriously elusive. He had spent the last 5 years abroad, managing his vast estates in the West Indies, and had only just returned to England. Aurelia risked a glance. He stood in the grand entryway, speaking with the Duke and Duchess of Richmond. He was tall, impossibly so, with broad shoulders that his impeccably tailored black coat only emphasized. His hair was dark, not powdered, and brushed back from a strong, intelligent face. He was not smiling. He looked, in fact, profoundly bored as he surveyed the room, his gaze sweeping over the hopeful, simpering faces turned his way. His friends, Lord Bennet and Sir Robert Peel, flanked him, but it was Ashworth who held the room's attention. He possessed an aura of command, an effortless power that made everyone else seem provincial. "They say he must marry this season," Eleanor whispered. "His mother is apparently desperate for an heir. Look at Lady Beatrice Finch. She looks like a cat who has just spotted a canary." Aurelia saw her. Lady Beatrice was the season's diamond, a stunning blonde with icy blue eyes and a reputation for a sharp tongue. She was already maneuvering her way toward the Duke, her white and gold dress a beacon in the crowd. Aurelia shrank further against the column. This was a world she no longer belonged to. These people were predators and prey, playing a game she had no stomach for. "Eleanor, I think I—" She trailed off. The Duke of Ashworth had finished his greetings. He stepped away from his hosts, his gaze scanning the room once more. It passed over Lady Beatrice without a flicker of interest. It moved past the clusters of giggling debutantes. It travelled across the dance floor, over the matrons, and settled with unnerving precision directly on the shadows where Aurelia stood. He did not smile. He simply looked. His eyes, a startling, clear grey, seemed to see right through her defences, past the blue dress and the pearls, and into the broken pieces she held inside. Aurelia's breath caught. The entire ballroom seemed to fade to a dull roar. He knew her, or rather, he had. Years ago, before Julian, before the darkness, Alistair Vane had been a friend of her older brother. He had visited their country estate one summer. She had been 17, all legs and laughter, and had famously beaten him in a race to the top of the ancient oak tree on their lawn. He had laughed, pulled a leaf from her hair, and called her Sprite. Now his face was unreadable. He gave a polite, almost imperceptible nod to Lord Bennet, and then he began to walk. He did not stop. He walked past Lady Beatrice, who had positioned herself directly in his path, offering a practiced, dazzling smile that faltered when he passed her by, as if she were a piece of furniture. He crossed the dance floor, oblivious to the way the dancers parted for him. The whispering began. "Where is he going? Who is that in the corner? My goodness, is that Lady Hammond, Julian Hammond's widow?" Aurelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to flee, to run back to the safety of Grosvenor Square, but she was frozen to the spot. He stopped directly in front of her. He was even taller up close. He bowed, a gesture of profound, almost archaic respect. "Lady Hammond," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that cut through the silence that had fallen around them. "It has been too long." Aurelia's throat was dry. "Your Grace," she managed, curtsying. "Welcome back to London. You are looking well, Aurelia." He used her given name, a deliberate, intimate choice that sent a fresh shockwave through the onlookers. He did not say she looked beautiful. He said she looked well, as if he knew she had been anything but. Thank you, Your Grace. You are kind." "I am rarely kind, Lady Hammond. I am, however, truthful." His grey eyes held hers. "I believe I remember you once telling me that you adored dancing the waltz." She stared at him, uncomprehending. I don't. May I have the honour of this dance?" Alistair Vane, the Duke of Ashworth, extended his gloved hand. The ballroom was utterly silent. Every eye was on them. To dance with him was a declaration. For her to dance, the broken widow, was a scandal. And for him to choose her, the grey shadow, over all the glittering diamonds. It was an insult. Aurelia looked at his outstretched hand. She saw the shock on Eleanor's face, the pure, distilled venom on Lady Beatrice's. She heard the indrawn breath of the Duchess. This was it. She could shrink back, murmur an excuse about her mourning, and seal her fate as the eternal recluse. Or she could take his hand. She thought of Julian's voice. "You are a clumsy dancer, Aurelia. You embarrass me." She thought of the dusty, silent room. She thought of the girl who had climbed a tree. Slowly, deliberately, Aurelia placed her trembling hand in his. "I would be honored, Your Grace." He enclosed her fingers in his strong, warm grip and led her onto the floor. As the orchestra, sensing the tension, struck up the first notes of the waltz, he placed one hand on her waist and drew her into the dance. The rest of the room blurred, and for the first time in years, Aurelia felt something other than fear. She felt safe. The moment the waltz ended, the ballroom erupted. The music could not compete with the furious, scandalized buzz that swept the room. Alistair bowed, kissed Aurelia's hand, and delivered her back to a stunned Eleanor, before being cornered by a fuming Lord Bennet. "In the name of God, Ashworth, what was that?" Bennet hissed, pulling him toward the card-room. "Lady Hammond? The poor woman is practically a pariah. She's melancholic, mad, some say. Julian Hammond's mad widow. And you snubbed Beatrice Finch for her." Alistair calmly retrieved 2 glasses of brandy, handing one to his friend. "I recall a time, Bennet, when Lady Aurelia was the brightest light in any room. Brighter than Lady Beatrice and all her manufactured charms. That was before Hammond, before her collapse," Bennet insisted. "You are playing with fire. The Ton will not accept her, and Beatrice Finch is not a woman you want as an enemy." Alistair sipped his brandy, his grey eyes cold. "I have faced down pirates in the Caribbean and revolutionaries in Paris. I am quite certain I can survive Lady Beatrice." He set his glass down. Lady Hammond looked haunted. "I knew her before. The woman I danced with is a shadow of the girl I remember, and I find myself curious as to why." His curiosity, however, had unleashed a storm. In the days that followed, Aurelia's tentative step back into the world became a full-blown retreat. The Ton was not kind. Her dance with the Duke had not been seen as a romantic gesture. It had been seen as an act of profound arrogance on her part, and bafflingly poor taste on his. The whispers that had once been pitying now turned venomous, and they were led by one person. She played the victim to trap him, Lady Beatrice Finch announced to a circle of eager listeners at a tea held by Lady Salisbury. We all know what she was like. Poor Lord Hammond. He was a saint to endure her sensitive nature for so long. Beatrice, enraged by the public slight, had made it her personal mission to destroy Aurelia. She saw the Duke's interest not as an affection, but as a temporary, bizarre fascination that needed to be cured. And the cure was to remind him, and all of London, of exactly who Aurelia Hammond was. She revived the old, poisonous rumours Julian himself had started. They say she would lock herself in her room for days. I heard from a former maid that she would fly into rages, throwing things. She's damaged goods, utterly unsuitable. He'll tire of her as soon as he realizes she's nothing but a pretty, empty-headed doll who cries at the drop of a hat. These barbs found their way back to Grosvenor Square. They came in the form of servants' gossip, in the sudden chill from shopkeepers on Bond Street, and in the well-meaning letters of concern from distant relations. Aurelia crumpled. The small, fragile flame of courage that Eleanor and Alistair had kindled was extinguished by the familiar, icy dread. Julian had been right. She was tedious. She was difficult. She was embarrassing. The dance had been a mistake. She refused Eleanor's calls. She instructed her butler, Mr. Davies, to say she was unwell to all visitors. She returned to the burgundy drawing-room, drew the curtains, and let the silence envelop her once more. She was safe here. No one could mock her. No one could whisper. She had been back in her sanctuary for 2 days when Mr. Davies, his face a mask of polite disapproval, appeared at the door. "My lady, you have a visitor." "I am unwell, Davies. I told you." "Indeed, my lady. But he refuses to leave." "Who? His Grace, the Duke of Ashworth." Aurelia's head snapped up. "Here, now! Absolutely not, Davies. Tell him I am sleeping. Tell him I have left London. Tell him anything." "I have already told him you are unwell, my lady." "He said—" Davies cleared his throat. "He said he would wait. In the foyer. All day, if necessary." Aurelia stood, her hands twisting in her grey dress. This was a nightmare. A duke. The Duke in her foyer. It was a scandal larger than the dance. He could not be here. "Very well," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Show him in. And Davies, bring tea." "Yes, my lady." She paced the small strip of carpet, her heart pounding. Why was he tormenting her? Why wouldn't he leave her to her ruin? Alistair entered the room, and it seemed to shrink by half. He was dressed for riding, not for a social call, in a dark blue coat, buff breeches, and polished boots. He held no hat, no gloves. He stopped just inside the doorway and surveyed the room, his expression unreadable. "My lady," he said, his voice quiet, "you have drawn the curtains again." Aurelia flushed, a mixture of shame and anger. "Your Grace, this is highly improper. You should not be here." "I was told you were unwell," he said, walking past her to the windows. "You do not look unwell. You look barricaded." With a single fluid motion, he did exactly as Eleanor had done. He pulled open the curtains. "Please stop doing that!" Aurelia cried, covering her face. "No," he said, his voice unyielding. He turned to her. I will not let you hide in the dark while that viper, Beatrice Finch, paints you as a lunatic." "So you've heard the gossip," she said bitterly, sinking onto the sofa. "Then you know why you must leave. You are the Duke of Ashworth. You cannot associate with me. I am damaged goods. I am Lord Hammond's mad widow. Your reputation, my reputation," he interrupted, "can withstand the chatter of a few jealous women. What I am concerned about is you." He sat in the chair opposite her, not formally, but leaning forward, his forearms on his knees. It was an intimate, earnest posture. Davies entered with the tea, placed it silently, and fled, sensing the electric tension in the room. "Why?" Aurelia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this? That dance. It humiliated me. It made them all turn on me." "It did not," he corrected her gently. "It exposed their cruelty. It did not create it. I danced with you, Aurelia, because I wanted to, because I remembered a girl who wasn't afraid of anything. I see her, still, underneath all this. Grief." "This is not just grief," she said, the words tearing from her. "This is fear. You don't know what he was like. Julian, he told me every day, in 1,000 different ways, that I was worthless, that I was stupid, clumsy, loud, that my very presence was an embarrassment. And after 3 years of that, you start to believe it. The whispers outside are just echoes of what he put in my head." It was the most she had said to anyone, even Eleanor. The confession hung in the dusty air. Alistair watched her, his grey eyes filled with a profound, startling anger. But it was not directed at her. He was a fool, Alistair said, his voice a low growl, and a coward. Only a weak man tears down a woman to build himself up. You are none of the things he said you were. You are intelligent. You are graceful. And your laugh. I remember your laugh. It was the most honest sound I had ever heard. A single tear tracked its way down Aurelia's cheek. She dashed it away angrily. I don't laugh anymore. You will, he promised. He stood. Now, go and put on your riding habit. She blinked. What? Your riding habit. I saw the stables as I arrived. You still keep your mare, Seraphine? She nodded, dumbfounded. Seraphine was her last link to her girlhood, a beautiful bay mare she hadn't ridden in years. How did you? I remember her too. You have 10 minutes. My horse is outside. We are going to ride in Hyde Park, in the middle of the afternoon. No, she gasped, standing. Alistair, I cannot. In the park, at the fashionable hour, everyone will see us. It will confirm every rumour. A lady, riding alone with a man she is not related to. It will confirm, he said, his voice absolute, that you are not a prisoner. It will confirm that you are under my protection. And it will show Lady Beatrice that her vicious little words have no power. 10 minutes, Aurelia, or I swear I will carry you out to the horse myself. She stared at him, at the raw determination in his face. It was terrifying. It was madness. It was, perhaps, the only thing that could save her. 10 minutes, she whispered, and she ran from the room. An hour later, Hyde Park was ablaze with the midday activity of the ton. The paths alongside the Serpentine were crowded with elegant carriages, promenading ladies, and gentlemen on horseback. It was the designated hour to see and, more importantly, to be seen. When Aurelia and Alistair rode through the Stanhope Gate, a hush fell over the nearest cluster of riders. It spread like a ripple, carriage by carriage, group by group, until it felt as if all of non-royal London had stopped to stare. Aurelia felt the heat of 1,000 eyes. Her hands, covered in her worn kid gloves, trembled on Seraphine's reins. Her black riding habit, though impeccably tailored, felt like a funeral shroud. They are all staring, she murmured, keeping her eyes fixed between her horse's ears. Of course they are, Alistair said, his voice calm and completely untroubled. He rode a magnificent black stallion, a creature of pure power that matched its owner. You are the most beautiful woman in the park, and you are riding with a duke. It is what they are supposed to do. They are not staring because I am beautiful, Your Grace. They are staring because I am infamous. Then let us give them a performance. He nudged his horse closer to hers, creating an intimate, protective space. Sit up, Lady Hammond. Head high. Look at them. Look directly at Lady Salisbury's carriage over there. Yes, that one. The lurid yellow one. She is the worst gossip in London. Smile at her. I cannot. Smile, he commanded, though his voice was low. A small, polite smile, as if you haven't a care in the world. Aurelia forced her lips into a tight approximation of a smile and nodded toward the carriage. She saw Lady Salisbury's mouth drop open, her lorgnette nearly falling from her hand. Alistair chuckled, a rich, warm sound. Excellent. Now look at Lady Beatrice. She is just behind them, in the navy blue landau. She appears to be choking on her own fury. Aurelia looked. Lady Beatrice was staring at them, her face pale with rage, her knuckles white as she gripped her parasol. The look she sent Aurelia was one of pure, unadulterated hatred. This was no longer a game of social standing. It was war. Aurelia faltered, but Alistair's presence beside her was a physical shield. He was so completely at ease, so impervious to their judgment, that some of his strength seemed to flow into her. "She cannot hurt you," Alistair said quietly, as they moved into a gentle trot. "Her weapons are whispers and lies. Mine are considerably more substantial. Now tell me about this mare. She has a fine gait." And so he did it. He forced her to talk. Not about her grief, or her husband, or her fear. He asked about Seraphine. He asked about her childhood in the country. He asked about the book of Shelley poems he'd seen on her table, the one he had sent anonymously after the ball, hoping she would remember they had once read Adonais together under that old oak tree. She did remember. As they rode, the tightness in her chest began to ease. The air was cool and fresh, a welcome change from the stale atmosphere of her home. Seraphine was happy to be out, her stride strong and confident. Aurelia found herself describing the mare's lineage, her voice growing stronger. She even, to her own astonishment, found herself describing the watercolors she had once loved to paint, the way the light hit the lake at dawn on her family's estate. "You should paint again," he said simply. I cannot. Julian is dead," Alistair said, his voice flat, stripped of any social nicety. "His opinions died with him. You are alive, Aurelia. It is time you behaved as such." The starkness of his words should have been cruel, but they were, instead, liberating. It was the truth. This ride was the first volley in Alistair's calculated pursuit. He was a strategist, and he had assessed his battlefield. He knew the ton would not be won over by secret meetings. They respected only power and public displays of it. His courtship, therefore, was aggressively, scandalously public. 2 days later, he appeared in her box at the opera. He did not ask permission. He simply walked in during the first intermission, handed her a small bouquet of violets, and sat down, focusing his opera glasses not on the stage, but on the occupants of the boxes opposite them. The message was clear. "She is with me." He took her to Gunther's, the fashionable tea shop on Berkeley Square, and ordered her strawberry ices, sitting at a table by the window. He sent his carriage, emblazoned with the Ashworth crest, to her house every afternoon at 4, with a note for her driver instructing him to take Lady Hammond through the most crowded streets of Mayfair, whether she was in the carriage or not. London would see his support every single day. Aurelia was terrified, and she was thrilled. Each public outing was an ordeal, but each one she survived made her stronger. She began to hold her head higher. She started answering the whispers with a cool, steady gaze, just as Alistair had taught her. She even, one rainy afternoon, unpacked her watercolors. The ton was in an uproar. Lady Beatrice was incandescent with rage, but her whispers were beginning to lose their power. It was one thing to kick a woman when she was down. It was quite another to attack a woman who was so very clearly under the personal protection of the Duke of Ashworth. The tide of opinion was not turning to love for Aurelia, but it was shifting to a grudging, fearful respect. But Beatrice Finch was not a woman to accept defeat. If public opinion and gossip couldn't destroy the relationship, she would have to find a more permanent, more devastating weapon. She would have to find something that even a duke could not ignore. She would have to find a way to prove, once and for all, that Aurelia Hammond was truly, irreparably mad. Lady Beatrice Finch was losing. The realization was a bitter acid in her stomach. She had watched for weeks as the Duke paraded his melancholy widow all over London. He had not only shielded Aurelia from social ruin, he had made her the most talked about, most intriguing woman of the season. The other debutantes were yesterday's news. Aurelia with her tragic past and her powerful protector, was a living, breathing, romantic novel. Beatrice would not allow this. She had planned to be the Duchess of Ashworth. She had spent a fortune on her wardrobe. She had practiced her signature. She would not be undone by a pale, weeping recluse. If whispers wouldn't work, she needed a cannon. She needed irrefutable proof. She needed something from the source of the rumours himself, the late Lord Hammond. She summoned her carriage and gave her driver an address in a less than respectable part of the city, near Temple. She was going to see a man named Mr. Finchley. Mr. Finchley was a weasel of a man, with watery eyes and ink-stained fingers. He had, for 2 decades, served as Lord Hammond's private secretary and man of business. He had been privy to all of Julian's affairs, from his gambling debts to his cruelties. When Julian died, Finchley had been dismissed by the estate's lawyers with a meagre severance, and he harboured a deep resentment for the Hammond name. Beatrice found him in a cramped, dusty office above a pie shop. "Mr. Finchley," she said, not bothering to sit on the rickety chair he offered. She placed a heavy purse on his desk. It landed with a satisfying thud. "Lady Beatrice, this is an unexpected honour. I am given to understand that you were Lord Hammond's most trusted confidant," she said, her voice smooth. "I handled all his lordship's affairs, yes," Finchley said, his eyes glued to the purse. "Then you must have been aware of his domestic troubles, the fragile state of his wife." Finchley's eyes narrowed. "Lady Hammond? Ah, yes. A difficult woman. Very emotional." "Exactly," Beatrice purred. "I am a dear friend of the Duke of Ashworth. I am deeply concerned he is being taken in, deceived. He believes her to be a victim. You and I, Mr. Finchley, know the truth. We know he was the victim." Finchley, who had personally seen Julian throw a brandy decanter at Aurelia's head for oversalting his soup, merely nodded. His lordship was a patient man. Very patient. "I need proof, Mr. Finchley. Something to open the Duke's eyes. A letter, perhaps. A journal entry. Something in Lord Hammond's own hand, describing his suffering, describing her instability. Surely such a thing must exist." Finchley looked from the purse to her face. He understood perfectly. "It is possible," he said slowly, "that I may have retained some of his lordship's private papers. Out of loyalty, of course. Let me check my files." He knew, of course, that no such letter existed. Julian Hammond was not a man to confide his suffering to paper. But Finchley was a passable forger. He had been faking Julian's signature on creditors' notes for years. "I will see what I can find," he said, pulling the purse toward him. "For the sake of the poor, departed Lord Hammond, of course." "Of course," Beatrice smiled. "I shall await your word." 2 days later, the letter was in her hand. It was perfect. Written on Julian's personal stationery, the handwriting a flawless imitation. It was dated a month before his death and addressed to his solicitor. Though it was a copy Finchley had kept, it was a masterpiece of cruel fiction. "I fear for her sanity, and perhaps for my own safety," it read. "Her moods are violent, her rages uncontrollable. Last night, in a fit of delusion, she accused me of infidelity and threatened her own life. I live in constant torment, but I will not abandon her to the asylum she so clearly belongs in. I fear she is beyond help. She cannot even manage the household. She is a child, a broken, hysterical child." Beatrice read it and smiled. It was vile, it was damning, it was perfect. She would not just whisper this, she would perform it. The Duchess of Richmond's grand costume ball, the final, most exclusive event of the season, was in 3 days. That was where she would spring her trap. She would read this letter aloud, She would save the Duke and destroy Aurelia Hammond in front of the entire world. Meanwhile, Alistair Vane was not idle. His courtship of Aurelia was not just a public spectacle. It was becoming a private devotion. He saw the colour returning to her cheeks, the light to her eyes. He had taken her to a small art gallery, and he had seen her hands, long and graceful, trace the frame of a Turner landscape, her expression one of near religious longing. But he was also a man who distrusted easy surfaces. He knew Julian Hammond's public reputation, but he had also heard whispers from his male acquaintances at White's club, whispers of staggering gambling debts, of a nasty temper, of shady business dealings. The man Aurelia described, and the man Beatrice Finch defended, were two different people. He intended to find the truth. He did not go to a forger. He went to Sir John Powell, his family's solicitor, a man with a mind like a steel trap. "Sir John," Alistair said, sitting in the lawyer's austere Lincoln's Inn Fields office, "I want you to find everything you can on the late Lord Julian Hammond, finances, properties, habits, and I want you to find his former valet." "May I ask why, Your Grace?" "You may," Alistair said, his grey eyes hard. "I am considering a proposal of marriage to his widow. I wish to be fully informed of any lingering complications." Sir John's eyebrows rose. "Understood, Your Grace. I shall be discreet." It took Sir John's investigators less than 48 hours. The valet, a man named Thomas Giles, was located. He had not been working in a grand house. He was a barman in a pub in Seven Dials, having been dismissed without a reference by Hammond's estate. Alistair went himself, dressed not as a duke, but in the plain, dark clothes of a city merchant. He found Giles wiping down the grimy bar. The man was in his 50s, with defeated eyes and a lingering air of dignity. Alistair sat and ordered an ale. "Mr. Thomas Giles?" Alistair asked quietly. The man froze. "Who's asking?" "A friend of Lady Hammond's." Giles's entire demeanour changed. He looked around the noisy pub, then jerked his head toward a back room. "What do you want?" Giles asked, his voice low and suspicious. "The truth," Alistair said. "About Lord Hammond and his wife." Giles's face twisted in a way Alistair had not expected. It was not suspicion. It was a deep, abiding rage. "The truth?" Giles spat. "The truth is that man, Lord Hammond, was a monster, a devil in a fine coat, and she, my lady, she was an angel. He hurt her. Not just with words, sir. He'd backhand her for being too slow. He broke her paintbrushes, her own things, just to watch her cry. He locked her in her room. He told the staff she was ill, so no one would question it. And we all stayed quiet. We needed the work, see? We stayed quiet." Giles' eyes filled with tears of shame. "I saw him. The night he died, he'd lost a fortune at cards. He came home in a rage. He tore her dress, right off her shoulder, shoved her to the floor, called her. Well, I won't repeat it. Then he stormed out, drunk, got in his carriage, and drove it into a wall. It wasn't suicide, sir. It was just a drunk, angry man being clumsy. And she was left to take the blame. Drove him to it, they all said. She never said a word against him. Not once." Alistair sat in the silence, a cold, precise fury building in his chest. He now understood the depth of the shadows in Aurelia's eyes. "Mr. Giles," Alistair said, his voice deadly calm, "I may have need of your testimony. Would you be willing to speak this truth, publicly, to defend your mistress's honour?" Giles looked at the Duke. "To see him put right? To see her put right? Sir, I would face down the devil himself." "Good," Alistair said. He placed a heavy purse on the table, far heavier than Beatrice's. This is for your time and for your loyalty." He walked out of the pub, his purpose set. He now knew the truth. And he knew that Beatrice Finch, armed with only lies, was walking directly into his trap. The Duchess of Richmond's ball would indeed be a performance, but it would be his, not hers. The Duchess of Richmond's costume ball was the most anticipated event of the year. The theme was A Midsummer Night's Dream, and the entirety of Richmond House had been transformed into an enchanted forest. Real trees, laced with fairy lights, lined the hallways. The grand ballroom was a woodland glade under a painted twilight sky, with musicians dressed as satyrs playing in a bower of ivy. Aurelia stood at the top of the grand staircase, her hand on Alistair's arm. She felt dizzy, not from fear this time, but from the sheer, fantastical unreality of it all. "Alistair, I don't know if I can," she whispered. He squeezed her hand. "You can. Look at me." She turned. He was not in a costume. He was, defiantly, in his formal evening wear, the dark blue sash of the Order of the Garter across his chest. He was not here to play a part. He was here as the Duke of Ashworth. Aurelia, however, had followed the theme. At his urging. She was not dressed as a nymph or a courtier. She was Titania, queen of the fairies. Her gown was a whisper of pale green and silver silk, with delicate, shimmering threads that looked like captured moonlight. Her dark hair was unbound, woven with small pearls and white flowers. She was not the Grey Widow. She was not the tragic recluse. She was, quite simply, breathtaking. "They will stare," she said. "Let them stare," he replied, his eyes filled with an intensity that made her blush. "It is time they saw you as I do." He led her down the staircase. As they entered the ballroom, the music and the chatter died, just as it had at the first ball. But this was not a silence of scandal. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated awe. She was magnificent. He was powerful. Together, they were a statement. They danced. He did not let her go, leading her from a waltz to a cotillion. He was charming, attentive, and completely focused on her, as if they were the only two people in the enchanted forest. For a little while, Aurelia believed it. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh, as he recounted a story of his travels. The sound was a revelation, even to herself. It was just after midnight, as the orchestra took a pause, that Lady Beatrice Finch made her move. She was dressed as Artemis, the huntress, in a severe white and silver gown, a silver crescent in her blonde hair. She looked beautiful, and as cold as ice. She was not alone. She had gathered a small, powerful audience around her, the Duchess of Richmond herself, Lord Salisbury, and several other arbiters of the ton. "Your Grace," she called out, her voice clear and carrying. Alistair and Aurelia turned. Beatrice's expression was one of perfect, practiced concern. "Your Grace, I am so sorry to interrupt, but as a true friend, I can no longer stand by. I cannot watch you be so cruelly deceived." A hush fell over the ballroom. This was it. The confrontation. Aurelia's hand flew to her throat. "Alistair," he put his arm around her waist, a steadying, possessive gesture. "What is the meaning of this, Lady Beatrice?" His voice was dangerously level. "The meaning, Your Grace," Beatrice said, "is that this woman, Lady Hammond, is not who she pretends to be. We have all heard the rumors of her instability, but I have proof." She held up a piece of paper. "A letter." "A letter?" "How droll," Alistair said, sounding bored. "A letter," Beatrice pressed on, her voice rising, "from the late Lord Hammond himself, written a month before his death. A copy, of course, kept by his loyal secretary, Mr. Finchley." Aurelia went white. No, that's not possible. Is it not? Beatrice smiled, a thin, cruel expression. Let me read it to you. Let all of London hear the words of the man who suffered in silence for so long. And she began to read. The words were like acid, dripping into the silent room. Her moods are violent, her rages uncontrollable. In a fit of delusion, threatened her own life. I live in constant torment, asylum she so clearly belongs in, a broken, hysterical child. With every word, Aurelia felt herself dissolving. It was Julian's voice, his exact words, his accusations, coming back from the grave to destroy her. The room began to spin. The faces of the crowd, shocked, horrified, and some, faintly triumphant, blurred. This was it. This was the end. He had won. Julian had finally, truly won. Beatrice finished, her voice trembling with false emotion. She looked at Alistair, her eyes wide. You see, Your Grace? You have given your heart to a mad woman. She is a danger to herself and to you. The entire ballroom waited. Aurelia swayed, her vision tunneling. She was going to faint. But Alistair's arm was a band of steel around her. He did not look at her. His gaze was fixed, with chilling intensity, on Lady Beatrice. A compelling performance, he said, his voice quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the room. And a clever forgery. Beatrice faltered. Forgery? Your Grace, this is Lord Hammond's own hand. Is it? Alistair asked mildly. You see, Lady Beatrice, I have also been busy. I find it fascinating that you, a woman of such delicate sensibilities, would be in contact with a disgraced, ink-stained clerk like Mr. Finchley, especially a man known to have a talent for mimicking his late master's signature. Beatrice's face lost a shade of colour. I don't know what you mean. Oh, I think you do. But the letter is not the most interesting part of your little drama. The most interesting part is the lie it tells. He turned to the crowd. You all knew Lord Julian Hammond. You knew him as a charming, if somewhat stern, husband. But you did not know the man who lived behind closed doors. You did not know the man who, according to his own ledgers, lost over $50,000 at cards in his final year. A gasp went through the room. It was a ruinous, shocking sum. You did not know, Alistair continued, his voice hardening, the man who systematically abused, terrorized, and imprisoned his wife to the point where she was, quite literally, afraid for her life. These are lies, Beatrice shrieked, her composure cracking. Slander! You have no proof. But I do, Alistair said. He turned his head toward the ballroom entrance. Mr. Giles, if you please. A figure stepped out of the shadows by the door. He was in a simple, clean black suit, but he walked with a restored dignity. It was Thomas Giles, the valet. My name is Thomas Giles, he said, his voice shaking but strong. I was Lord Hammond's valet for 10 years. That letter, it is a lie, every word. My master was the one with the rages. My master was the one who was violent. I personally, his voice broke, I personally tended to my lady, Lady Hammond, after he struck her. I saw him destroy her possessions. I heard him tell her, day after day, that she was worthless. He was the monster. She was his prisoner. The silence in the room was absolute, a stunned, horrified vacuum. Beatrice was ashen. A disgruntled servant. You would believe a servant over a man of quality. Over me? I would, Alistair said. And I believe Mr. Finchley, who is currently in a carriage with my solicitor, Sir John Powell, has suddenly found his memory and is willing to confess to the forgery in exchange for avoiding transportation. Your little plot, Lady Beatrice, is over. Beatrice Finch looked around. She saw no sympathy. She saw only the cold, judgmental eyes of the society that had, moments before, been her army. She was ruined, utterly. With a sound that was half sob, half scream, she turned and fled the ballroom. The room remained silent, everyone watching Alistair and Aurelia. Aurelia was trembling from head to toe, tears streaming down her face. But they were not tears of fear. They were tears of release. It was over. The truth was out. Alistair turned to her, his expression softening. He gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The entire ton watched, and then he did the unthinkable. He dropped to one knee. The collective gasp of the ballroom was loud enough to stir the candles. A duke, on one knee, in the middle of the Duchess of Richmond's ballroom. It was not done. It was unprecedented. Aurelia stared down at him, her hand over her mouth, her mind utterly blank with shock. "Alistair," she whispered, "what are you doing? Get up! Everyone is watching." "Yes," Alistair said, his voice clear and strong, intended for every person in that room. "They are. I want them to watch. I want them to bear witness." He did not take his eyes off her face. The powerful, elusive, cynical Duke of Ashworth looked at the mad widow with an expression of such raw, unguarded adoration that it silenced every remaining whisper. "Lady Aurelia Hammond," he began, his voice resonexed in the grand room. "For 3 years you have lived in shadow. You have been a prisoner of a dead man's cruelty and a society's thoughtless gossip. You have cried for years, believing you were broken, believing you were forgotten." He reached up and took her hand, the one that was not covering her mouth. He pressed a kiss to her gloved knuckles. "You are not broken," he declared. "You are the strongest, most resilient, most courageous woman I have ever known. You survived a torment none of us can imagine, and you did it with your grace and your goodness intact. You are not a shadow. You are the light." Aurelia was openly weeping now, but her tears were silent, cleansing. "Julian Hammond," Alistair continued, his voice ringing with conviction, "took your laughter, your art, and your joy. I am here to give them back. I am here to offer you a new love. A love that is not a cage, but a fortress. A love that will celebrate your voice, not silence it. A love that will spend every day proving to you how truly, astonishingly worthy you are." He held her hand tightly. "She cried for years," he said, looking around at the stunned, rapt audience. "And I vow before all of you that she will never have cause to cry in sorrow again." He turned his gaze back to her, his grey eyes shining. "Aurelia Hammond, the girl I remembered, the woman I have come to love more than life itself, will you do me the profound honour of becoming my wife? Will you be my Duchess?" The silence stretched for a single, agonizing heartbeat. Aurelia looked down at this magnificent man who had seen her at her lowest, who had fought for her, who had publicly destroyed her demons and validated her truth. He was not just offering her a title, he was offering her a life. He was offering her herself back. She sank to her knees, right there on the ballroom floor, in her gown of moonlight, so that she was level with him. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Yes, Alistair. 1,000 times yes." He surged forward, cupping her face in his hands, and kissed her. He kissed her in front of the Duchess, in front of Lord Salisbury, in front of God and all of the ton. It was not a chaste, polite kiss. It was a kiss of promise, of possession, of profound relief. And the ballroom, after a moment of stunned paralysis, erupted. But it was not whispering. It was a wave of applause. The Duchess of Richmond, a notorious romantic, was dabbing her eyes. Lord Bennet was grinning from ear to ear. Even Sir Robert Peel was clapping. They were not just applauding a marriage proposal. They were applauding the end of a tragedy and the beginning of a legend. Alistair stood, pulling Aurelia up with him. He kept his arm locked around her waist, claiming her as his. He looked at her, his private smile just for her. "I believe, my lady," he murmured, his lips close to her ear. "They are playing our waltz." And as the orchestra, sensing the moment, swelled with music, the Duke of Ashworth took his future Duchess in his arms and danced, the entire ballroom clearing a space for them, the new, undisputed centre of the London world. Aurelia, her head resting on his shoulder, finally stopped crying, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she laughed. And so, the story of the mad widow of Grosvenor Square came to an end. In its place, the legend of the Duchess of Ashworth began. Lady Aurelia Hammond, a woman who had been silenced by cruelty and buried by gossip, was brought back into the light by a man who refused to believe the lies. He didn't just offer her his name and his protection. He offered her the truth. He saw the woman she was, not the victim her husband had tried to make her. Theirs was not a simple love story. It was a resurrection. It reminds us that no shadow is so deep that a little courage and a powerful love cannot break it. And it proves that sometimes the greatest love is not about finding a perfect person, but about seeing the perfection in someone society had deemed broken. Thank you for listening to this incredible story of resilience and redemption. If you were moved by Aurelia's journey from tears to triumph, please show your support. Don't forget to hit that like button so we know you enjoyed it. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that their past does not define their future. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of drama, love, and the powerful twists that change everything. We have new stories coming every week, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.